I just read a post online from a woman asking how to protect her savings from a greedy daughter-in-law. I smiled. Protecting your retirement account from a bad marriage is a luxury. It is a minor inconvenience compared to my reality. My own parents, Arthur and Evelyn, didn't just want my money. They actively traded the life of my 7-year-old son Lucas to fund a $350,000 destination wedding for my sister Paige. This wasn't a family misunderstanding. It was a transaction. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I sat in the parlor of my parents' opulent country club estate in Columbus, Ohio. The expansive room smelled of expensive wax, lemon polish, and fresh lilies. In my hand, I held a single piece of paper, the $120,000 estimate for Lucas's experimental cardiology treatment. My 7-year-old son's heart was failing, and this specialized procedure was the only viable path forward. I slid the paper across the polished mahogany table toward my father, Arthur, and my mother, Evelyn. Arthur barely glanced at the figure before pushing it back. He steepled his fingers, his expression a mask of practiced corporate regret. "Natalie, we need to practice financial realism," he said, using the exact detached tone he employed when declining a poor business investment. "We cannot liquidate our secure assets for an experimental procedure with absolutely no guaranteed return on investment." Evelyn nodded in immediate agreement, meticulously adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet so it caught the afternoon light. "Your father is entirely right. We have to think about the long-term stability and reputation of this family." Right on cue, a uniformed caterer walked into the room, carrying a silver tray lined with crystal flutes. "The champagne samples for Paige's Santorini wedding, ma'am," he announced. My mother immediately brightened, taking a glass and analyzing the bubbles with genuine enthusiasm. They were happily spending $350,000 on a destination wedding for my sister, but $120,000 to save their grandson's life was deemed financially irresponsible. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't fall to my knees and beg them to reconsider. Begging implies a fundamental belief that the other party possesses a working conscience. Looking at them sipping vintage champagne while casually discarding the price tag of my son's life, I realized they were entirely bankrupt of empathy. This wasn't a family in crisis. It was a balance sheet, and Lucas and I had simply been written off as bad debt. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical, cold, precise. I stood up from the velvet armchair. I didn't say a single word as I retrieved the medical estimate from the table. The transaction had been declined. The negotiation was definitively over. "Where are you going?" Evelyn asked, briefly looking up from her champagne flute with mild annoyance. "We still need to review the floral arrangements for the reception." I turned my back and walked out the front door. The heavy oak clicked shut behind me, sealing off their world of curated luxury. I got into my car and drove straight back to the hospital. When I parked in the concrete structure, surrounded by the sterile reality of my son's illness, I took out my phone. I went to my contacts, selected Arthur, and pressed block. I selected Evelyn, and pressed block. Finally, I selected Paige, and pressed block. I didn't leave an emotional voicemail. I didn't draft a furious text message outlining their failures as parents and grandparents. Immediate, cold severance was the only logical response. Emotional pleading is a currency paid to those who value it, and my parents only valued capital. I simply severed the connection. The contract was officially terminated. My son was rapidly running out of time, and I had 0 seconds left to waste on an empty investment. I started the engine, my mind already calculating the next operational step. To understand the absolute zero of my retaliation, you have to audit the ledger of our family history. For 32 years, I had been the capable, silent workhorse, the silent investor in their version of family. I paid my own way through college, subsisting on instant noodles and multiple part-time jobs, while Paige was handed a fully funded luxury university experience. When Arthur made a disastrous real estate investment 5 years ago, I quietly liquidated my modest portfolio to bail him out. I asked for no recognition and received none. My existence was a cramped, historic loft with drafty windows, while their reality was a sprawling estate with endless luxury. I accepted this disparity because I fell into the trap of normalizing cruelty. This is a common operational failure. When toxic behavior is consistent, you adjust your baseline to accommodate it. You tell yourself that breadcrumbs are a feast. You rationalize their dismissals as just the way they are, effectively writing off their emotional deficits as a fixed business cost. You convince yourself that enduring mistreatment is the price of admission for a seat at the family table. I had normalized their blatant favoritism of Paige, accepting my role as the dependable subordinate so completely that I almost missed the reality of the situation. Their love wasn't unconditional. It was a subscription service, and I was perpetually footing the bill. The contrast between my reality and theirs was never more stark than in the weeks following my silent departure from their home. I sat in my small kitchen, calculating loan terms and second mortgages, while they booked private jets and luxury villas. My anger was entirely righteous, deeply earned over decades of uncompensated sacrifice. The emotional ledger was so heavily tilted in their favor that the structure was buckling. I had spent my entire adult life trying to balance the books, operating under the delusion that if I just worked harder, gave more, and required less, they would eventually issue a dividend of affection. But their refusal to fund Lucas's life-saving treatment was the final audit. It proved that my contributions held zero equity. They were perfectly content to let me bankrupt myself emotionally and financially, as long as it didn't disrupt their cash flow or Paige's aesthetic timeline. I rubbed my eyes, attempting to summon some residual affection, a lingering sense of familial duty, or even simple regret, but there was only clarity. The fog of normalized abuse had evaporated, leaving behind a stark, illuminated spreadsheet of their betrayals. I wasn't experiencing a breakdown. I was experiencing an awakening. I had been paying the premiums for a policy that offered zero coverage. From that moment forward, there would be no more silent sacrifices. There would only be accounting, and the bill for decades of gross negligence was about to come due. I looked around my modest loft, taking inventory of the life I had built independently. Every brick, every piece of second-hand furniture was earned without their assistance. They thought my independence made me weak, an easy target to discard. But they fundamentally misunderstood the situation. Independence wasn't my weakness, it was my ultimate operational advantage. I didn't need them to survive, which meant I had the absolute freedom to dismantle them. Lucas's condition deteriorated with clinical, terrifying speed. His heart, too weak to sustain him, finally gave out. He passed away on a rainy Thursday morning. The monitors flatlined, and the hospital room fell into a deafening silence. My 7-year-old son was gone. I didn't crumble. The grief was absolute, a black hole in the center of my chest, but it did not render me inoperable. Instead, it stripped away the last remaining fragments of my humanity regarding my family. Arthur and Evelyn did not rush to the hospital. They did not show up to offer condolences or arrange for the funeral expenses. Instead, their cruelty reached an unforgivable, astronomical peak. 2 days after Lucas's death, I accessed my blocked voicemails to retrieve a message from the hospital billing department. Nestled beneath it was a message from Evelyn. Her tone wasn't sorrowful. It was intensely inconvenienced. "Natalie," the voicemail began, "we received the notice about Lucas. Tragic, of course. However, we noticed you scheduled a memorial service for Saturday. That conflicts directly with Paige's rehearsal dinner flight schedule. We need you to shift the memorial to a Tuesday. We simply cannot disrupt the wedding logistics at this late stage. Let me know when you've updated the itinerary." I listened to the message twice. There was no hesitation, no underlying grief. My son's death was merely a scheduling conflict on her pristine calendar. Later that afternoon, a friend sent me a screenshot of Paige's public social media status. Paige hadn't mentioned her nephew's death. Instead, she posted a photo of her manicured hand holding a crystal champagne flute, with the caption, "It's so exhausting when some people always try to steal the spotlight and manufacture drama during my special season. Good vibes only as we head to Santorini." I stared at the screen. The audacity was almost impressive. My son's death was manufactured drama designed to steal her spotlight. They were actively marching toward a $350,000 wedding over the fresh grave of my child. I set the phone down on the table. My pulse was steady. My breathing was controlled. The final variable had been entered into the equation. They had effectively greenlit absolute, unsparing retaliation. By reducing my son's life to a logistical annoyance, they had voided any remaining social contracts. They weren't family. They were a hostile entity operating with complete disregard for human life. I didn't weep over the voicemail. I didn't rage against Paige's post. I archived both digital files, backing them up securely. Evidence is critical in any professional demolition. The period for mourning was officially suspended. It was time to transition into the execution phase. I opened my laptop, cleared my browsing history, and brought up the public records database. Anger is a volatile fuel, but when refined into cold precision, it becomes an unstoppable force. I was ready to tear down their empire, brick by blood-stained brick. There would be no warnings, no emotional confrontations, and absolutely no opportunities for them to negotiate a surrender. They had assumed my silence in the face of their cruelty was a permanent surrender. They failed to realize that silence is also the sound of a trap snapping shut. The wedding march would play, but it would score their total destruction. Transitioning from raw grief to icy, professional precision required a simple cognitive shift. I compartmentalized my sorrow, locking it away in a secure mental vault, and activated my operational skill set. I am a public library archivist. My entire career is built on forensic investigation, uncovering buried truths, tracking missing documents, and connecting seemingly unrelated data points. Arthur and Evelyn thought I was just a librarian. They didn't understand that I possessed the exact tools required to systematically audit their entire existence. I began digging. I utilized public county property records, open-source corporate registries, and accessible historical tax assessments. I spent 72 hours straight tracing the public financial architecture of my parents' real estate assets before escalating the data. Their empire was built on a foundation of inherited assets, specifically from my late maternal grandparents. My grandparents had established a private family trust decades ago. Arthur and Evelyn managed it as trustees. I needed to know the exact parameters of their fiduciary duties. I needed to find a structural weakness, a retroactive breach of contract, or unpaid inheritances that could legally punish them for their gross negligence. I didn't attempt this complex legal navigation alone. I liquidated my remaining retirement account and hired a sharp, aggressive probate attorney named Julia. Julia was a public interest lawyer and a former library patron I had assisted extensively in the past. She possessed a clinical, predatory intellect that perfectly matched my current objective. Our meetings weren't filled with tissues or sympathetic nods. They were strategy sessions. I need a complete autopsy of the Foundation's bylaws and historical disbursements, I told Julia across her conference table, handing her a highly organized binder of public records I had already extracted. I am looking for any deviation from the charter, any unauthorized siphoning of capital. Julia reviewed the index, her eyes scanning the meticulous timelines I had constructed. If they deviated, even slightly, we can file for a forensic audit, she noted. But we need probable cause. Find it, I instructed. The emotional tone of my life had entirely shifted from the paralysis of sorrow to the momentum of a calculated legal hunt. I was no longer a grieving mother asking for charity. I was an auditor seeking a profound accounting. I mapped out their corporate entities, their offshore accounts, and the shell companies they used to finance their lavish lifestyle. Every night, while Arthur, Evelyn, and Paige toasted their upcoming nuptials in Greece, I sat in the dim light of my loft, following the paper trail. I reviewed thousands of pages of digitized tax returns and foundation disclosures. The numbers began to tell a story of systemic entitlement and unchecked greed. I was looking for a minor infraction, a careless error in their accounting that I could exploit to freeze their assets or trigger an IRS review. I expected to find standard upper-class tax avoidance. I expected to uncover mild corporate malfeasance. But the paper trail of betrayal I was meticulously unwinding was leading somewhere far darker. I wasn't just tracking money anymore. I was tracking the exact currency they had used to purchase their luxury, and the ledger was about to reveal an atrocity that defied basic human comprehension. My archivist instincts flared, signaling a massive discrepancy in the Foundation's historical medical grants. I highlighted the data points, sent the encrypted file to Julia at 2 a.m, and waited. The trap was laid, and the trigger was primed. Julia called me 3 days later. "You need to come to the office immediately," she said. Her voice, usually composed and tactical, carried a rigid, unnatural tension. I arrived at her firm within 20 minutes. Julia had multiple files spread across her desk, highlighted and cross-referenced. She didn't offer a greeting, she simply turned a document toward me. I dug into the Foundation's original charter, specifically the endowments your grandparents established, Julia explained, pointing to a highlighted paragraph. The exact experimental medical facility that could have treated Lucas? It was partially endowed by your grandparents 20 years ago. I stared at the paper, my mind processing the data. They donated to the facility? It's worse, Julia said, her tone dropping. The foundation charter included a dedicated, fully funded emergency medical trust, specifically established for the direct descendants of the founders. Meaning you, meaning Lucas. The room went absolutely still. There was a fund? I asked, my voice a flat, dead calm. A medical fund for Lucas? Yes, it contained over $400,000, Julia confirmed. Arthur and Evelyn were the sole trustees. When Lucas was diagnosed, you were legally entitled to that money. It was meant to bypass standard insurance protocols for experimental treatments. I looked at the documents. The numbers blurred, then sharpened. Why was it denied? Julia slid a second folder across the desk. It wasn't denied. It was emptied. Arthur and Evelyn actively blocked your access to it. They forged your signature on a beneficiary waiver, claiming you declined the trust's assistance. Then, they systematically siphoned those exact funds through a dummy corporation. To pay for what? I asked, though the cold, clinical part of my brain already knew the answer. To pay for Paige's $350,000 Santorini wedding, Julia stated. The revelation was absolute. This is the invisible ledger of the Golden Child. The Golden Child's effortless, luxurious existence is rarely self-sustaining. It is almost always financed by the unseen, uncompensated sacrifices, or in this case, the literal theft from the scapegoat. The Golden Child's spotlight is powered by the darkness forced upon the rest of the family. Paige's designer gown, her vintage champagne, her perfectly curated destination wedding, they weren't just funded by indulgent parents, they were paid for with my son's life. Arthur and Evelyn hadn't just been selfish parents practicing financial realism, they were criminals. They had committed felony fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and grand larceny. They had financed a party by executing their grandson. I didn't gasp. I didn't break down. The absolute horror of their actions functioned as a catalyst, eliminating any microscopic trace of hesitation I might have harbored. Can we prove the forgery? I asked, my voice devoid of any inflection. Irrefutably, Julia confirmed. I have the wire transfers linking the trust directly to the wedding planners in Greece. Good, I said, standing up. Draft the federal fraud report. Prepare the IRS audit trigger. Do not file them yet. We are going to wait. We are going to let them spend every single stolen cent, let them get comfortable, and then we are going to drop the sky on their heads. This wasn't just about financial restitution anymore. This was a terminal accounting. I walked out of Julia's office with a heart made of ice and a fully documented blueprint for their total annihilation. Justice is a slow, methodical machine, but it never misses an invoice. It took 4 years for the IRS to catch up with Arthur and Evelyn. An unrelated audit into one of their shell companies triggered a catastrophic cascade of financial ruin. The federal investigators unspooled the tangled web of their fraudulent tax returns, penalizing them with astronomical fines and seizing their primary assets. Their country club status was immediately revoked. Their accounts were frozen. Their pristine public image was obliterated. I monitored their collapse from a distance, thriving in my own right. I had been promoted to a senior archivist position and ran a highly successful independent historical consulting firm. I was entirely in control, financially secure, and patiently waiting. The climax of their destruction arrived on a Tuesday evening. The doorbell of my secured, upscale condominium rang. I checked the camera feed. Arthur and Evelyn were standing on my doorstep. They looked aged, desperate, and stripped of their arrogant veneer. I opened the door. They didn't offer a polite greeting. Evelyn immediately burst into frantic, ugly tears. "Natalie, please," she begged, clutching her designer handbag like a life preserver. "We have nowhere else to go. The bank is foreclosing on the estate tomorrow morning." Arthur stepped forward, his pride completely shattered. "We are facing federal prison, Natalie. We need a $120,000 loan to cover the immediate legal retainers. We'll pay you back. I swear it." $120,000. The exact sum they had refused to provide for Lucas. The mathematical symmetry of the universe was absolute. I didn't invite them inside. I stepped out into the hallway and handed Arthur a digital recording camera and a pen. "I am not offering you a loan," I stated, my voice clinical and flat. "But I have a transaction for you to complete." They stared at me, confused. "You will turn on that camera," I instructed, handing him a formal legal stipulation document prepared by Julia. You will read this confession of your own free will into the lens, acknowledging the forged signature on the emergency medical trust and the stolen funds. In exchange for your formal recorded statement on this affidavit ledger, I will hand you a document that resolves your immediate housing crisis. Arthur turned pale. Natalie, you can't be serious. That's a confession to a federal crime. You have 60 seconds to decide, I replied, checking my watch. 55. Desperation overrides self-preservation. With Evelyn sobbing hysterically beside him, Arthur turned on the camera. Hands shaking, he confessed to every single charge. He detailed the forgery, the dummy accounts, and the wire transfers. When he finished, he handed the camera back to me, looking like a broken, hollow shell. "We did it," he whispered. "Now, the document. Please." I verified the video file was saved. Then, I handed him a crisp, legal envelope. Arthur tore it open, his eyes scanning the paperwork. His expression morphed from desperate hope to sheer, unadulterated horror. This is a formal notice of foreclosure and immediate possession," he stammered, his eyes widening in panic. "Yes, I confirmed," my voice dropping to a cold, dead whisper. "Through my legal team's shell company, we acquired your distressed mortgage portfolio from the lender via public foreclosure assignment. The legal window has closed, and the title has officially transferred. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. As for the $120,000 you wanted, I already spent the money on structural liquidations." I stepped back inside and shut the door. The execution was absolute and final. I submitted Arthur's recorded confession directly to the federal prosecutors, pairing it with the exhaustive paper trail Julia had compiled. Arthur and Evelyn were indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. They were sentenced to federal prison, their legacy reduced to a cautionary tale of greed and disgrace. Paige did not escape the fallout. The public revelation that her extravagant lifestyle and fairy tale wedding were financed by stolen medical funds meant to save a dying child utterly destroyed her social standing. Her wealthy husband, unwilling to be associated with such a grotesque scandal, filed for divorce within the year, citing the unbearable public humiliation. She was left with nothing but the fading photos of a wedding that had cost her family everything. As for me, I found a profound, unshakable peace. The ledger was finally balanced, the debt fully collected. I dedicated a significant portion of my time and resources to advocating for pediatric healthcare access, ensuring that other families would not face the systemic barriers that had trapped me. I built a functioning charity in Lucas's name, funding it honestly and managing it with strict, transparent oversight. I've come to realize that the old saying is a dangerous lie. Blood is nothing more than a biological accident. True family is a conscious choice, demonstrated exclusively through protection, loyalty, and sacrifice. For years, I stayed because I thought endurance was a virtue. I waited for apologies from toxic people who were entirely incapable of remorse. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes, it's the only way to set yourself free. But understand this: forgiveness does not require reconciliation. You do not owe your abusers access to your life just because you share a genetic code. Stop waiting for people to suddenly develop a conscience. Stop normalizing cruelty just to keep a seat at a table where you are actively being starved. You have to find the clinical, unsparing courage to cut the cord and protect your own peace. You are the sole architect of your future, and you possess the absolute authority to evict anyone who brings destruction into your space. Leaving behind a toxic family system isn't a failure. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. When you strip away the romanticized illusions of unconditional love, you are left with the raw data of how people actually treat you. Evaluate them on their actions, not their titles. Build your own family from the ground up, selecting members based on character, integrity, and mutual respect. The ashes of my past provided the exact fertile ground needed to plant the seed of my current independence. I am thriving because I stopped seeking their validation and started enforcing my own standards. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment about your own journey with boundaries, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. See you in the next story.